Welcome to another episode of Digging Up Positivity. April was a busy month, down from Easter bunnies filling up their cars with gas, to the fandom doing amazing things for charity, especially Barks. There's plenty of fun news to wolf down, plus our special guest, our featurette, is Rick Griffin, the mastermind behind the very popular 10 times Ursa Major award-winning webcomic Housepet. So without further Adler, ado, let's be like a meerkat and dig in. We start with our friends down under. Fur Out West managed to raise $9,762 for the Kanyana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Texas Furry Fiesta managed to raise $6,411 for the Center for Animal Research and Education known as CARE, an organization devoted to the rescue, rehabilitation and holistic nurturing of sick, injured and abused exotic animals. Magpie, together with several big names in the furry community, managed to raise $69,420, a very nice amount, for the ALS Association North Carolina chapter. And the amount is still rising. They streamed over a month and broke all expectations. And the ALS North Carolina chapter responded with this lovely video.
We can't thank you enough. I personally say thank you, Mark, and the entire crew.
No, wait a minute. I wanted to say thank you.
I wanted to say thank you. And thank you, Mark, and all the Papabarks.
I wanted to say thank you so much, Mark. You all are amazing. Completely wonderful. We just can't believe
No, I wanted to say thank you. Thank you so much, Mark, for all that you've...
We cannot say thank you enough.
Awesome.
Our big blue bird started out this year with a big bang. But last month he could be seen helping a local charity, Community Happens Here. During the first Teen Barista Happy Hour of the year, he rode the bike that powered the popcorn machine and the snow cone maker. And the kids love those eagle-powered num-nums. If there's one thing I love, it is music. From the time I worked in the music industry, I have been introduced to a wide variety of music, and within the fandom it is no different. But it is not often when I hear one of my favorite songs from a rock opera being performed on a furry convention. SnOwOflakes sure made their rendition a big spectacle, and oh my god, really, that voice. In the UK, Furry and Hoovian Connor got to demonstrate his brand new Dalek Omega for the BBC. He often can be seen working on fundraisers in his hometown and beyond. In total, he has raised over £25,000. For our American friends, that's over $34,500 for various charitable goals. I can't wait to see more of Dalek Omega, even if I will be exterminate. For over 4 years, a couple of Turkish turtle doves have been trying to build their nest on the top of a traffic light in my hometown of Hilversum in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, traffic lights are not the most stable surface, and each time their eggs got smashed into the ground. And unfortunately, turtle doves are a little bit persistent. Once they have chosen a spot, they will keep on trying to build their nest there. Featurette, as seen here helping out a local meerkat, just had to take action. And together with her dad, they devised a plan. They made a wooden construction for the birds on top of the traffic light, and now they can hatch their eggs without having to fear them falling on the pavement down below. Every year we have wonderful, confronting or stunning photos nominated for the World Press Photo Contest. Well, one of those photos, nominated in the category Contemporary Issues, caught my attention. Peyo touching the hand of a 24-year-old woman with cancer while she hugs her son. Peyo is a horse. often seen at the Centre Hospitalier de Calais in the north of France. Every day he visits about 20 people in that very hospital as a therapeutic animal. Usually that role is reserved for dogs, but Peyo has something special. Before Peyo started working in the hospitals, he was being seen on horse shows. His human, Hassan Bouchaku, said that when volunteers from the crowd were chosen, he always chose those who were physically or mentally unwell. Peyo was able to tell who needed him the most, and he was ready to support them all until the very end. I hope this photo will win the World Press Photo Award, but most of all, I hope that Peyo can help many more easing their pain in the future. We have covered the wolves in the Netherlands before, but each sighting is still very exciting. Sylvia Moleman captured them on camera when her son yelled out that he saw a dog. She was a bit in shock for a brief moment when she saw the wolf. Wolf expert Roel Corbet from the Dutch Forestry Commission was skeptical at first, but the released video took all his doubts away. The question remains though, is the wolf merely passing through on his way towards Germany? However, only time will tell. April has almost passed, and with that, of course, we had Easter, with bunnies and chickens and eggs. A gas station in the Dutch city of Nijverdal had a special Easter sale. You could tank for free if you were dressed as an Easter bunny, an egg or a chicken. Unfortunately, it was just for a very limited time, but the result was so much fun to watch nonetheless. For 30 minutes the gas station was filled with all sorts of Easter critters, laughter, and of course many funny pictures and videos were taken. I love my Nintendo Switch. It's fun and versatile on both on the go and at home, but sometimes I wonder, could it be a bit bigger? Yeah, I know, I'm a sucker for anything big. But Michael Pick thought the same and started to work on his huge Switch that actually works. How much I would have loved to have it, but he did donate it to a children's hospital, which is amazing. But still, a meerkat can dream, can he? These are exciting times for space enthusiasts. We got the SpaceX program and NASA is hard at work as well. In South Korea, the Yonsei University, they designed a 1U Cubesat equipped with a camera to process visible light, and a 2U Cubesat equipped with an occulter to block the sun's light. The 1U Cubesat is named Timon, and the larger 2U satellite is named Pumbaa, named after the iconic duo of the Lion King. They will be part of the Soyuz 2 launch. For many, it can be a nightmare. Your much beloved fursuit is getting misplaced, lost, or even stolen. But it happens more than you think. There is a Twitter account that devotes itself to find the lost fursuits. Fursuit, Search and Rescue. So if your fluffy side gets lost, this place might be a good start. But now, on a more joyous note, let's go over to Score Chaser for the April Featurette.
Hello, Score Chaser here, and I am pleased to announce for this month's Spotlight on Digging Up Positivity, we have an interview with Rick Griffin, author and creator of House Pets, the 10-time Ursa Major Award winner for Best Anthropomorphic Comic Strip. House Pets is currently approaching its 13th year since being released and has been released on a 3-times-a-week basis with very few breaks during its run. These breaks are filled in with guest strips sent in by fans. To try and do a synopsis on this comic is tricky given its almost decade-and-a-half run, but I will try. Imagine, if you will, your dog or cat. Imagine it can stand on 2 legs, it has thumbs, and can talk to you. And that it also happens to be a pawn in a game of Dungeons & Dragons being played by petty demigods. Oh, and your dog or cat? They may have also been human at one point. That synopsis by no means does any justice to the strip, its characters, or its plot, but it'll give you a general idea of what you're in for. Hello, Rick. Thank you again for being available. It's a pleasure to have you here on Digging Up Positivity. Rick was kind enough to answer some questions for me regarding his work. Rick, would you care to introduce yourself?
Hello, I am Rick Griffin, and I'm the author and artist for House Pets, A&H Club, Haven Celestia, and like a dozen other projects about talking animal people.
What was your inspiration for creating House Pets?
I always wanted to make comics since I was a kid, especially since one of the few forms of entertainment I could reliably get were newspaper comic collections, like Garfield, Boone County, and Calvin and Hobbes, and I'd constantly make comics based on them, sometimes directly ripping off entire jokes using my own characters while scribbling them into lined paper, and then getting frustrated at just how hard it was to draw stuff over and over again. Around about 2000, everybody and their grandmother was making comics on the internet, and since I was in middle school at the time, I figured I should finally try actually putting something on the internet. It started as like a couple Sprite comics. There was a Mario one and there was a Kirby one, and I planned for like 2 or 3 different fantasy comics that focused primarily on dragons. And in 2004, I made a furry world comic called In the New Age that lasted about a year before I finally canceled it. I sat on the idea of doing another comic for a while, and around that time, I was trying my hand at just writing stories, which, given my anxieties at the time, is still rather difficult. And I considered that as much as I wanted to do a story-based comic, I also could just write a comedy. That way, if I didn't have an idea of where to go next, I could just be funny and people would probably go with it. So I dusted off my and my older brother's characters from when I was a kid, and then shoved those aside and wrote 2 new characters just to see where they took me.
Did you have a master plan for the overall plot, or did you just start House Pets as a slice of life that evolved into a grand epic?
When I started House Pets, I didn't really have a plan past like the first year. The infamous early gag about how Grape actually being a girl when Peanut didn't know it was basically all that I had. I wrote that in my head like a year and a half before it actually made it into the comic. And that was about the extent of my plans. Because, to be honest, at the time, I just didn't know how to write a story. I'd read books on the subject all through high school, trying to force my way into figuring out how to just get a story from concept to completion, and House Pets was basically a remedy for that. I always did best in projects when I was just forced into the deep end of the pool, so my goal for early House Pets was to try and work all sorts of things just to see how they work, see how I work, see if it's any good or not, and the Grand Epic basically came about when I thought, what if I just plant seeds for a Grand Epic and see where that goes? I didn't even have a clue that's where I was going to do when I put Pete into the comic.
What is the origin of orange soda being intoxicating to the animal characters in the House Pets universe?
It's kind of funny you ask that. That's a gag I'm certain I got entirely from Boone County. Occasionally in that comic, you'd have characters who weren't supposed to be drinking beer. It's 2 young children characters, several young children characters, and in one case, a reformed addict. So if they needed to be drunk for a gag, there'd be a helpful arrow box indicating that the foamy beverage is in fact root beer. And since I was still being strictly PG at the time, I basically translated this straight over, but made it orange soda instead. 1, because I think orange soda is underrated, and 2, because it makes less sense.
House Pets has a cast of characters that dwarves any Stephen King novel. Is it tricky keeping track of all the characters and how each arc potentially affects them?
Yes and no. No, because I try to keep it all vaguely contained. You have this group of characters, the pets, you have this group of characters, the wild animals, you have this group of characters, the police dogs, and this group, the wolves, this group, the ferrets, etc., etc. So I really only need to keep track of how events affect each group. Then if I want to focus on one group, I'll figure out what happens to each character in that group when I go to write them. That said, I know I've completely dropped a lot of characters. It happens. They're there, they're just in the background.
Speaking of the cast, who is your favorite character to write for, draw, or both?
My favorite character is Jessica. I mean, she's basically something of a proto-character for my other comic, A&H Club, so I don't really need to write her as much anymore. But I just love writing down on their luck characters that still try to make the best of their situation.
Moving away from House Pets, you also have many other projects, including another webcomic, novels that you write and edit, along with doing your own personal art and streaming. How do you have the time to do all of these things? Or is it that Karashad used multi-dimensional portals to grab different versions of you to work on each individual project?
The answer is that I don't really know either. I originally measured out the time to do house pets so that it'd slot around my college work. And I wanted to be able to create a comic within 2 hours, and ideally do 1 week's worth of comics in 1 day. That slowly expanded, but that still comes down to like 2 days per week to do house pets. That leaves 5 days to do other work, so I figured I could easily fit other projects into that. Especially taking care of my Patreon takes 3 days every month, which has ballooned into 5 or 6 days every month, which means that about 14 days of every month are devoted to either house pets or my Patreon, which still leaves a good half of the month to do other projects, which are themselves still ballooning out of control. So I started hiring people to help keep up with my workload. Currently, I still do house pets entirely by myself, but that may eventually change.
You have had great success with both your comics and your artwork, but you also have written novels. I understand you've just released the second installment of your novel trilogy set in your Haven Celestia setting. Could you tell us a little bit about it, and how you would compare the differences, if any, of storytelling from novelization versus comics?
Besides being a comic artist, I also just wanted to always be a novelist since I was a kid. I barely even read novels, but the way people gushed about them made them seem like the very prestigious way to tell stories that was totally better than television and comics. So, of course, I wanted in on that. I mean, nobody's going to tell me that my stories aren't going to be prestigious, and it turned out that novels are a lot more mundane than people made them out to be. But I still wanted to do it because I wanted to make stories, and that's another way to make stories. So, around 2011, I published a short story called 10,000 Miles Up, which I had 3 goals for it. It was a high-stakes heist, it had space dragons, and it had a twist ending. That was all. I just wanted to see if I could make a story with those criteria. That was read by a friend of mine, Greg Luderman, and he liked it so much, he wrote his own fanfiction based on it, which ended up being a novel called Skeleton Crew. I eventually read it, and I liked it, and then he wrote sequels, and the sequels were gaining popularity, and all of a sudden I was like, I need to get in on my own racket here. So I made the decision to rewrite 10,000 Miles Up as a novel. I had written a couple novels up to this point, none of them were published, but I thought, this is something I could invest myself into doing now and actually finish it. And I technically already had the story I was going to tell, so it was just a matter of telling more of it. And it turned out that the story was much longer than I anticipated, so then I figured I'd break it up into 3 parts. So 2 of those are now complete. First book is Traitors, Thieves, and Liars, and the second book is The Captain's Oath, and the third book will hopefully be done by 2023. There's a lot that's different about writing prose versus writing comics. So there's this principle in storytelling called show versus tell. You usually want to show as much as possible, communicate through detail, expression, imagery, character dialogue, as opposed to tell, which is when you just list out everything that the audience needs to know, divorced from the scene that you're trying to convey. That was really hard for me for a very long while, because in prose, technically, you're just telling the audience everything anyway. It's all just words. Where do you draw the line between what words are vivid imagery and what words are boring explanation? And it didn't help that I tend to conceive of stories in pictures and feelings more than words. So it turns out there's a trick to it. And the trick is to not think about showing or telling at all. It's to think about the characters. It's like, what can I say that will get across this character's problems to the audience? In the process, I'll probably just tell you some things, like what the character's demeanor is, where he is, and what he's doing. But so long as all those details are tied to a problem the character is experiencing, they become sensory details to the plot. And that's basically how I do it for comics anyway. Main difference is in comics, I can just draw a picture, and you can tell right away all those things that can take sentences upon sentences in prose. So I guess the major difference between comics and prose is having to make myself have the patience to give all those details to the audience.
What is your favorite part of the creative process?
My favorite part of the creative process is when an idea finally comes together into something I can actually use. That's also probably one of the hardest things to do on command, which is part of the reason I have so many projects. Not everything fits into House Pets. I have lots of other ideas for lots of other genres.
Do you have a favorite strip from House Pets or A&H Club, or possibly both?
That's like asking me to pick a favorite child, so of course I'll do it. My favorite single gag is still probably one from 2010 called Winner Takes All. Which I'm sure almost nobody remembers, especially since everyone's current favorite gag of mine is Ali saying the B word in A&H Club.
Thank you again for being here with us. It was a pleasure having you, Rick. Would you like to tell us where people can find you and your work?
Thank you for having me. You can check out my work at housepetscomic.com or rickgriffinstudios.com, and my Patreon is at patreon.com/rickgriffin.
Thank you so much for being with us on the show, Rick. And with that, we have arrived at the end of the video. If you like it, please subscribe. I update the channel at least once a month. And I would like to thank the following amazing people, sponsors of this channel: Cosmic with a K, Els Dekkers, Falconeo, Hanzana, Ishnula, Kitako, Tantru McNally, Taros, and of course, Score Chaser. We will return on the 29th of May with a very special guest from the East. Thank you very much for watching, and of course, all the hugs.
Picking up positivity, picking up positivity, picking up positivity, picking up positivity.